Today we're rolling on almost 5 years of ownership of this 2018 Mercedes C300. Now I want to talk about this, our long-term experience, our long-term ownership review of this vehicle, because we've had some great ups and we've had some few downs. I want to talk about why we bought this car, some of the things that have happened, some of the costs of some of the issues that we've dealt with, and some ongoing problems. More importantly, if you're looking at buying one of these cars, I want to suggest there's definitely some great options if you're thinking about picking one of these up, and I'm going to share that with you as well. But on top of this, I'm going to finish this off with, would I do this again? Do I consider this a mistake? Would I have bought something different? And I'm going to share that with you. So let's get into it now. Let's start by talking about how we came to be in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of great options from Alfa, BMW, Audi, Benz, you name it. There's lots of brands that all deliver on these accounts. Vehicles that have these types of engines, all-wheel drive as options, turbo power, and of course great amenities in the luxury car segment. So we came across this because we liked the looks of it. It had a very attractive style, and we wanted to try something different. We've had numerous BMWs in the past, and we've also driven some Audis, Alfa Romeos, and quite honestly, we just came into this. We like the way it looks. We've had Mercedes in the past. I want to talk about this because there are some great details here and some great amenities that really drew us in. One of them, of course, being the front end of the grille of this vehicle. Now, of course, this vehicle being 5 years of age, it still looks very contemporary. And even with the facelift since then, this vehicle still looks very, very late model and modern. It also looks a little more dressed up than we've seen in what BMW was doing at the time. And certainly Audi, we weren't loving the brand that much. So we really cycled in and bought this car. And we weren't disappointed. I think overall, cosmetically, this car has done itself very well, and we enjoy it. We like the looks of it. When you're driving and you're coming up and you're looking in the rearview mirror and you see this car imposing on you, this vehicle looks nicely done up. And as well, if you look at the CLA, we find the CLA has a bit more of a pointed nose. This C-Class has a bit more imposing look. And so we really like that. That's why we drew to it. That's why we bought it. And we still continue to enjoy that. So overall, I would say the things that we enjoy about it are the sheer cosmetics of the vehicle. The looks of this one, of course, being the coupe, you can get the four-door, of course. In the sedan you can get either or, but we really like the coupe of this vehicle, and we liked it more than the competition. Say, for example, BMW's 4 Series. I'm not the biggest fan of the coupe style. I liked BMW sedans, but for this coupe, this looked really sharp, and we decided and elected to go with that. It's been no disappointment on that regard. Every time I look at this vehicle, and as they say, if you don't at least look back at your vehicle once or twice when you're walking away to go into the store, then you probably bought the wrong car. This vehicle has never really disappointed. I love the looks of it. I love the looks of the coupe. It looks really spanky. And that continues to be a thing that we really enjoy. You also get the glorious LEDs on the taillights, which are a nice detail on the coupe, which on the sedan, it's a little bit more small and it looks more like a kidney bean. But these ones, I love the looks of it. And that's something we've really drawn to initially. And that's something that we still really like. It does give us the 4MATIC, and as I've said, we haven't had any issues with the all-wheel drive system as such. We do get snowy weather here, we get icy conditions, and with these all-weather tires that we have on here, we have the Continentals here right now. It gives you an all-weather. Now these are almost ready to change out. They're getting worn down a little bit, but ultimately the all-wheel drive system in the 4MATIC and the right set of tires, this vehicle is almost unstoppable in the winter driving. So it's been exceptionally well and well behaved, and the quality and durability of it's been good too. We haven't had anything to complain about in the all-wheel drive systems. We've had no glitches, no gremlins, no drivability concerns with the all-wheel drive system. And honestly, from the exterior, it's been holding up very, very well, except for a couple of items which we're talking about here in a second. One thing I want to mention, sunroof. A lot of people talk about some cars, sunroofs leaking, falling off the rails. Knocking on wood, we haven't had any of that. Sunroofs, it closes perfectly. The seals are well done here. Everything fits nicely. There's only one thing that I've noticed recently. Of course, cracked windshields are not uncommon, but that's not a fact and an issue with the brand specifically. But I noticed over here, we just noticed this recently on this trim, there's this bubbling going on right here on this black trim, you'll see. Don't know what that is, don't know why that is. The car is not rusting in any way, but there seems to be some kind of corrosion or something bubbling up underneath this trim. So we've had an issue with that. That's something I just actually noticed in the last couple of weeks. So little faults and flaws in that regard, that's been an issue. So clearly watch out for some of that trim. Now we did get, of course, this vehicle has this nice, you know, chrome detailing on the outside. Some of these you can get the blacked out trim all the way around. I personally like the black trim, but I think with this color, with this blue and the chrome, it works well. If I had a black car, I would be inclined to go all black. But because this car has this nice shade of blue, you have nice accents, and the headlights are very bold, and you've got the silver rims, I feel like it just works very, very well. And I love the design, I love the coloring, and all the contrast on the vehicle. Now, one thing that I have to mention on the exterior that isn't holding up so well. Down here, you'll notice on the coupe, see? The sedan looks a little different, but we have this large rocker panel that comes up here and it kind of spreads and widens up here. But you'll notice, see this piece? This has kind of got some play in there. But we actually, believe it or not, we had driven over a set of train tracks and they weren't even that aggressive. They weren't really any worse than what we're looking at here. You know, just a little bit of a bump. It was something like that. And all of a sudden crack, and we heard something snap. And when we pulled over at the, you know, once we got home, we noticed that this piece, this rocker piece, had actually dropped down. It dropped down probably down to about a ½ an inch, about to there. And we actually took it into the dealer because at that time we still had warranty. The dealer took a look at it and they said, you know what, yeah, there's just a couple snaps that came undone, and they snapped it together. But I still notice that it's still not as tight, even after that repair, even compared to the other side seems to be fitting a wee bit tighter and a wee bit more consistent. This side here just fits nice. It's perfect all the way along. So there's clearly something going on there. The fit and the finish of some of the body panels overall are really good, but there's some of those fragile parts. I mean, generally, if you're talking about fit and finish, I'm very much impressed. You see a lot of the lines, everything is nicely done, and everything's consistent throughout. A lot of the detailing, you'll notice the trim, the fit, the finish, the noise. There is no wind noise. One thing that I've noticed owning this car for quite some time and driving it in the winter and the summer and the heat and the cold and you name it, there's no real wind noise. Highway speeds, you don't get buffeting, you don't get weird noises. Speak to rattles, because there are some on the inside. I want to speak to that. But on the outside, the general wind noise and the resistance to wind noise is exceptional on this car. You don't get whistling, you don't get some weird noises. You know, I've driven Chevy trucks and you get this noise up front here and you can't just quite figure it out. And some vehicles just howl and make noises as you're driving down the highway, especially at highway speeds. This vehicle's never had that, and it's actually been really, really well done in that regard. You can drive at a decent rate of speed on the highway and it's just smooth. The vehicle is just coasts along very, very nice. There's no weird noises, and it just whistles along just quietly. So the driving, the quality of the drive in the C-Class is exceptional. The vehicle tracks straight. It's not a very dodgy vehicle. Because of the right amount of camber that they probably have towing and camber, the way the vehicle's set up, it drives very, very comfortably. So overall, we're very pleased in this last 5 years or so how this vehicle holds, tracks, drives on the highway. It's quiet, it's peaceful, serene, and it just stays in its lane. Now, one thing on the outside that I find kind of flaky with these vehicles, this one here, you can use your feet. You're supposed to be able to use your feet and it opens up. But that doesn't always work that easily. And so many times I found myself here waving my foot, waving my foot, waving my foot, and that thing just never wants to open. So it's sort of, from my opinion, this time it opened very well, but quite often it just doesn't work. Now, the key fob is very functional. I like the functionality. I've shared that. And if you want to see the key fob tutorial, I'll share that at the end of the video. But you can also close this remotely, which is nice, press and hold. And so some of the technology in this vehicle is very nice. It works well otherwise. Most of that, the key fob works well, the remote controls, the power windows, sunroof, everything works seamlessly, flawlessly, no calibration problems. I've heard of some cars where the calibration is out on a window and it pushes too high in or doesn't go close far enough. And sometimes there's calibrations with the regulators in the windows. Not a lot of issues in functionality. Really, it boils down to more problems with this kind of issue here with a few of the body panels that maybe feel fragile, but the panel fitment is really good. The paint quality is really good. And actually, we also find it very resistant to rock chips. Like, we've had a couple of minor chips, but usually a lot of these cars, and I found even with our Toyota, it's just chip, 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 chip. It feels like the paint is very fragile and thin on the Toyota. But on these vehicles, the paint is actually pretty durable. We've taken a pretty good jag of hits, even though we've got some paint protection film on the front half of the hood, which I always recommend on any car. The point is, other areas, A-pillar and all over the rest of the body panels, it seems to be resisting it. So if it's a direct impact, it'll probably chip it. But these slightly deflected chips, I find the paint is very robust, and that's important because the last thing I want to be doing is constantly upgrading and touching up paint and look at all these little marks. Either that or just put full PPF on the entire car, but that's going to cost you $6 or $7 grand, and nobody wants to spend that money just after you just sign the paperwork to spend on that new vehicle that cost you enough to begin with. You want to have to throw another $7,000 or $8,000 on paint protection film. So overall, the paint quality is good, the rims are good. Everything is well built from my perspective. Honestly, very, very impressed with most of it. Again, and I'm going to reiterate, the fragility of certain components, like that body panel down there. So we'll get to the engine and some of the things that we've been dealing with there in a second. But let's take a look inside first, and I'll explain a few of the things that we've dealt with there. So, first of all, what I've noticed here, I love the layout, and we loved it when we saw it. We fell in love with the overall ergonomic design, the theme of the interior of this car, and it was great. And it still is great, and we still like the way it feels, and it's very airy. And this is my own personal opinion. This is a color choice. We went with this black and almost white or off-white, two-toned, of course, interior. We have the same thing for seats, but we decided to put these seat covers on here just to save it. Your dirty jeans get in and out, in and out. But these seats, I love the color of this, and so we went with this light color, and you can get a better representation of what it looks like back here. But it's a beautiful color theme in this car. Now, it shows a perforated seats, but that's only to match the front, which are heated and cooled. The backs are not. Of course, here, steering wheel, everything's wearing fairly well. The controls all work flawlessly, if we're being honest. I haven't really had any kind of issue with any of the controls. Now, this piece here, see, what is this? Well, you're saying, well, that's just a speaker. You betcha that's a speaker. That's a problem. It works well, but we hit that set of train tracks, and at the same time that we actually had this pop loose, this popped loose too. Now, we took it to the dealer, it was under warranty, so they basically just reinstalled it and said, you're good to go. But this speaker, when we hit that bump, went into the door cavity, like popped out and went into the door, so it fell inwards. And I don't, what on earth? How do body panels fall off like that? I've never had vehicles like that before, where body parts fall off. So overall, again, it is something that you've just got to be aware of, is that, in my own personal opinion, there's some fragile parts in this car. I mean, I look at, parts like this, it's not the end of the world, but you just see movement and play in some parts, rattling and creaking in other parts. And I'll demonstrate that here for a second. Here, let me get in here, and I'm going to show you. Now, overall, interior is very well put together, and that's a big reason why we went with the Mercedes versus, say, some of the other options, is not feeling that it was a better quality car, but we like the ergonomics. It looked a little fresher. Now, a lot of people don't really like the piano gloss finishing, and I'm gonna basically, a word of advice here: make sure you've got a lint-free, scratch-free type rag, and keep this clean. Don't use chemicals on any of this black stuff, and certainly don't wipe it with like that dry napkin from Tim Hortons or from McDonald's that you got in your hand and you just want to wipe it off. You're going to end up scratching that. And I've seen some very bad scratched up examples of that finishing. It looks horrible. So it's fragile. So these areas, this piano finishing is a very fragile area. It looks great, but a lot of car brands are using that these days, and this is no different. And there's a lot of it here. So I like the looks of it, but the trade-off, of course, is it scratches very, very easily. And I've tried to eliminate that because I saw an example. I was looking at a C-Class. It was a cabriolet, and this area was all mangled up because they must have had their keys in this area, and they tried to wipe it. And you could see, like, it was really scratched. So you've got to be careful with this stuff. The other thing is, look. See, squeaky. There's squeaks. There's squeaks and rattles. There's squeaks and rattles. Like, what I find is, I mean, a lot of cars these days are loaded with plastic. So I don't think this is unique necessarily to this car. I've seen more expensive cars make more squeaks and rattles than this. But I've also seen cheaper cars do less squeaks and rattles and feel more bolted together. And I hate to say this because Hyundais and Kias, we know that they've got problems with a lot of their quality and their engines, and I'm still not going to buy one. But I did compare. I looked at a Hyundai, a lower level one at one point, and I was comparing, and I was really trying to do a quality experience with it and trying to yard on all of the plastics and parts. And I found it seemed like it was actually less squeaky and less rattly than what you're finding in this Mercedes-Benz. So there are some squeaks, there are some rattles. You do have this thing here, which pops out. That's your seatbelt retractor here. So you put that and this thing pops out. This looks kind of flimsy. We haven't had any problems. It works flawlessly every time. But again, when you have more moving plastic parts, you're probably going to get more plastic noises and rattlies, and you just get some rattle noises inside the interior from time to time. I noticed these rattles from here and there and just sort of everywhere at times. And it's not the end of the world, but it certainly is something to be aware of. If you're worried, and if you're that person that's sort of anal retentive and you really don't like noises, a strange squeak or that strange rattle, it's going to drive you nuts. This car probably will. Now, that said, if you're on smooth roads and you're driving down the highway, wind noise, external noises are well insulated. And even when there's loud trucks driving by, and you might have big buses and gravel trucks, and those with big air brakes and big diesel engines, and they're making all kinds of noise. They could be driving by making all that noise. You close the window in here, you're very well insulated. So I'd say overall, you feel like you're in quite the cocoon and insulated cabin, which is nice. It's just that some of the few plastics and parts in here tend to start to make a little bit of noise, at least with some age. And we didn't notice it so much early on, but as we put a few miles on the car and a few heat-cool cycles through summers and winters, it's probably just enough to start loosening up some parts and fittings and hit some rough roads in this garbage city that we live in. It's just enough to make that noise. And so overall, it's a nice place to be. It's a nice driving experience. But again, this keeps harkening back to, the speakers, keeps harkening back to some of the squeaks and rattles through the cabin, or even that body panel on the rockers that popped off. Just know that there's a possibility of some of those fragile parts, plastics, clips, fittings that might come apart. Ultimately, other than that, it seems to be holding up well. Very impressed with the way it's designed, very impressed with the materials that they use. We've got a nice selection of, high quality plastics that don't necessarily, or plastic dashes that don't feel cheap. You've got a nice mixture of brushed aluminum. You've got this high piano finishing, more brushed aluminum parts here, nice texturing, a nice blend every which way in this car. Even this fake stitching is a nice touch. Didn't have to do that. It's clearly not real stitching. You've got to ante up to a Ferrari to get that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, everything looks very nicely put together. And overall, I would suggest that, from an ergonomic standpoint, it's a nice place to be. So no big problems there. But we want to talk about what's going on under the hood, because there's been a couple of things there as well. So firstly, before we do that, I want to mention that we had a check engine light here about 2 weeks ago, popped up for the first time ever. Now, we've had a variety of different codes related to sensors, lights, all kinds of weird electrical problems. We've taken it to the dealer once, twice, 3 times. They've tried to diagnose it. They pulled the codes, and it's always related to some kind of communication or protocol regarding a lot of the sensors and the safety sensors. Like I said, the proximity sensing, the lights, and all those features seem to crop up. And I had to grab my code reader. Now, this OBD code reader does not work on those weird sensors, but it did work on the check engine light that we had about 2-3 weeks ago. So I used my code reader, pulled the code, because I did see the check engine light of despair down there, and I realized that there was an issue. I pulled a code, and there's a video I just featured about that specific issue, but the code was related to the PCV valve. So firstly was an experience we have, and I talked about that in much depth. I'll share that video at the end as well too, with some of the major issues that we had with this car, and it just kept causing us all kinds of stress. And because we were getting those codes on the dashboard related to lights, related to sensors, and it would go left, right, left, and it would get all kinds of different lighting issues. And sometimes the lights, you'd get one light working, one light wasn't working. So it was clearly there was a problem going on with the brains of the operation. But it was quite peculiar because this happened in cold weather. We had a scheduled maintenance period to get our oil change done. We checked it in on Saturday. They rushed it through there because they were pushing it through, trying to get it done for that day. And then they said after they were done, they didn't put it on the invoice, but they said verbally, here, we even wash your engine for you. Boom. We set off. Shortly thereafter, a day later, all of a sudden we started getting these weird codes, these lighting codes that I told you about on the dash, started spitting out all these weird codes. Now, my takeaway on that was washing engines is never a good idea. Spraying water, pushing water down into, you know, wiring harnesses like this is never a good idea. And there's a lot of wiring harnesses under this vehicle in the compartment that are at potential risk. Was that the issue? Was that a contributing factor? Well, that's my theory. That said, we had it back and forth numerous times to the dealer. They'd reset it, pull the codes out, and make it go away. It would come back. We even changed the battery because there was a suggestion that maybe it was a low voltage on the battery, but that wasn't it because we put a new battery, and that didn't cause or fix the problem either. Now, that said, without getting into a whole lot of detail, we had that check engine light, and that was a PCV. The PCV, which essentially is located down in this area on this 2-liter Turbo 4, is something that is a well-known problem with Mercedes-Benz. And you'll see this foam material here, this hose. Well, there's a collection of equipment for your crankcase ventilation. There's hoses that go around the back, hoses that go underneath and around. It's a very convoluted system, and I share that in much more detail as to what we did about that issue. But there was a fortunate reality. So if you're thinking about buying one of these cars, that is an extremely well-known problem. So well-known, in fact, when we had it done, the service writer told us that this was a big problem, and they're doing these on the daily. They have a lot of these new PCVs on stock, on shelf. All they have to do is, if you have that code, you take your vehicle in. If it's that code and it's verified as the PCV, they send the request into Mercedes. Mercedes says, yeah, that's green light. Due to, it seems to be related to a lawsuit allegedly many moons ago that called out a Mercedes. That part was, again, I'll say allegedly faulty and was causing all kinds of problems. And in some cases, colder weather seems to cause more of an issue. But that means that it's almost a 50-50 chance, maybe even a 60-40 chance more likely you're going to have that issue, that PCV. And the problem is it's about a 6 or 7 hour labor job plus parts. It's a $3,000 job. So it's something you need to be aware of. But the bonus is, if you're looking at the C300 like this, coupe, sedan, whatever, or even a GLC, the SUV, which uses the same drivetrain, you're probably going to have the same issue, but it's covered under the warranty, which gives you another 15 years and 241,000 kilometers. So once we had that dealt with, we knew right away, even if it creeps in again, even if we have this problem again, chances are the dealer's going to cover it willy-nilly, all free. So in some ways it's a weakness, but you know it's covered. So that's nice to know, and that's a peace of mind. And so it's not all lost. I don't hate on it. It's great. Other than that, the engine's a little rattly. I will comment on that. The engine kind of sounds a little diesely, but that seems to be part and parcel to a lot of these overhead cam, modern direct injected turbo gas engines like we're finding here. But other than that, there's been a few complaints. If you look on the forums, a few people have complaining that back cylinder hold pistons. In other words, through a detonation or a fueling problem, all of a sudden they have catastrophic engine failures, usually the back cylinder on this Renault-derived engine. But that seems to be much far and fewer between, and that also seems to afflict earlier generations of these vehicles, and not so much an issue for the late models. There were some updates on that particular issue. So just to be aware of, do your research, get a later model. This is an 18. I would also suggest getting a 19 because of another reason. This. We cannot do a remote start with this 2018, but you can on a 2019 because the communication protocol in this vehicle and the firmware system allows the newer versions to give you a remote start. We don't have a remote start on this vehicle, and you can't. I mean, some people say you can do it and get it done through, you know, aftermarket, but I've never been a big fan of aftermarket, and then you're getting people in there butchering wiring. I've always been a believer in modern vehicles. They should have everything incorporated. Even my Jag F-Type did not. It had it through an app that you had to pay for, $35 a month, which is kind of silly because the equipment's there. Why am I paying an app and a subscription? And that just never sits well with me. Neither does what Mercedes and a lot of other brands are doing, starting to hit you with subscription services for certain features. That's not sitting well with me. In this case, we don't have much of that system going on, not much for subscriptions to worry about, so that's not really a problem. Overall, I would suggest going with the 19. But one other thing I really appreciate about this car, because a lot of cars like BMWs now are going with no dipsticks. But this car here gives you a dipstick. You can actually use a standard dipstick, and the beauty is you can give it a smell. You can give it a smell. You can look at the dipstick. You want to make sure there's no froth in the oil. You want to make sure it smells okay. Too much gas might mean you're over fueling and you might want to do an oil change. There's nothing like an old mechanic style of checking your own oil in your own way and using it with a dipstick. A lot of modern vehicles now do not have dipsticks, and it's all done electronically, which seems like a convenience until you want to pull over and check your fluid and it says you've got to wait for 15 minutes because it has to let the oil settle. So the modern systems aren't, in my opinion, all that nice. I mean, they're quick and they're handy at times, but they're not that great. I personally love the good old-fashioned dipstick, and this car has it. So a very easy car to maintain otherwise. You know, fluid changes, coolant, easy to access. Filter, I did this here last year. I also did an oil change, which I sucked it out of the top through the dipstick hole, and I showed that as well. I did that feature on the channel. I did the full oil service on this vehicle, as well as, like I said, I did filter changes, oil changes, and whatnot. Done the battery on this vehicle. I do plan to do a brake fluid flush there as well, but they keep everything hidden, out of sight, out of mind, and it looks very clean. It's a nice sorted engine compartment, and everything looks nicely laid out. Quite honestly, quite an easy vehicle to maintain for the most part, until you've got to do a PCV replacement or some odd repair like that. A pretty decent vehicle overall, and we're pretty satisfied with the overall performance of the vehicle, the economy, and dare I say, reliability. Now there's something else I want to mention, is the front wheels. We still have a weird noise, a bit of a squeaking noise on a slow roll. If you're driving, say, through a drive-through and you can hear the wall of the building right here, you can hear this sound reverberating off the building, but there's a slow roll squealing coming from the front end. I don't know if it's some kind of a bearing. I don't know if it's a drive shaft. I don't know if it's a front differential, transmission. We're told it was just a tire. We took it into the dealer, but they didn't actually put another tire on to test that theory. They just said, well, they couldn't find anything by pulling the wheel off and taking a look at it. So I'm not sure on that. We will validate that again and get back to you once we put some new tires on it. But ultimately, there's some weird noises on the front end. That's been something that's been sort of bothering and plaguing us for some time. That has been, if we're being honest, a bit of an annoyance. Now, overall, I know I've had videos in the past where I've very passionately spoke about all the struggles and stress about this car. And there have been problems, and in the moment, they've been a lot of issues in my mind, and some things that you should never have to deal with. And the dealership network should sort out that problem, even when you bring it up during the warranty period, and not wait until warranty's up to all of a sudden find that it is a problem. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, our last experience with that PCV was one of the best experiences in the service department I've ever had. I dropped the car off. They gave me an Uber ride home. I basically left for the day. They said, your car's ready. I picked it up, $0. I picked it up. The car was perfect. The check engine light was reset. The PCV was replaced. He gave me the full rundown. They gave me a hot coffee on my way out. Another ride by the shuttle home. Life was great. It was one of the most seamless, least troublesome service experiences I have ever had. And I'm not just saying that. I was literally very pleased with how it all turned out. No money, no cost. Just got the repair done, no muss, no fuss, and hey, it was free. Can't go wrong with free, right? So what do I like about it? So overall, do I like this car? Do I recommend this? And are there anything different I would do instead of buy this car? So generally, we like the car. It hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been flawless. It has caused us several trips to the dealership, but it actually hasn't cost us a lot of money out of pocket, if we're being honest. Even with all these little glitches and gremlins, most of which the dealer's been managing, or they just haven't found the issue. A lot of it we've lived with. We put a new battery. That cost us a little bit of money. I think we paid about $550 for a battery. We do our annual A and B services. Last year, instead of $1,100 service, I did it for about $300 because I did it myself in my own garage. That was the first service outside of the service plan that we had. So basically, it's cost us very little other than the annual servicing, which is in that, $400 or $500 range per year. And other than that, and a new battery, we're about to put some new brakes, or probably put some new brakes in this soon, and certainly some tires. But after, you know, we're at close to 70,000 kilometers, it's about time anyway. So that's going to cost some money there, but it really hasn't cost us a lot of money out of pocket. And it's been one of these cars and experiences that have been actually well sorted. It's actually a pretty decent car. Now that said, would I do this again? Probably not. I probably would not do the C300. In my opinion, it's a good little engine, but it is Renault derived. It is a 4-cylinder. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I would personally go with the M276. I would probably go with this C43 AMG version of this. It looks stouter. It has a better sound, exhaust note, and they say it's more reliable. I mean, according to a lot of fans and lovers of all these brands, they all say the C43, the 276, and all the research I see, it not only has way more power, it's in line with BMW's B58, but it's also much more durable, reliable, and it's more of a Mercedes engine. So other than that, the car we really like, hasn't been perfect, but would we do it again? Sure, but with the C43. With all of that said, be sure to check out right there, why are used Mercedes-Benz so cheap? If you're looking at one of these, you're probably going to wonder, why are they that cheap on the used car market? Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.